Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, how are you today? I hope all of you are doing fine. Let me introduce myself. My name is Alia Windaryanti and today I would like to present about defining error. Okay, before I start, let me tell you about the purpose of this chapter. Actually, the purpose is to define key terms, since we shall only be able to think clearly about error analysis if we understand precisely what these terms mean, how they differ from each other, and how they are mutually defining. Okay, without further ado, let's talk about ignorance. In ignorance, there are three terms that you should to know. The first one is epistemology. Okay, what is epistemology? Epistemology means the study of knowledge. And then how about epistemologists? Epistemologists means specialists in the theoretical fields of language acquisition and syntactic theory, more especially language epistemologists. Next is the linguistic ignorance. It means the investigation of what people do not know and how they attempt to cope with their ignorance. Okay, the next one is about the foreign language learners' ignorance of the target language. In this kind of type, there are two. The first in silence and the second is avoidance. In silence means when the learner makes no response, that is, says or writes nothing. For instance, silent cultures of Finns and Japanese. Avoidance means learners usually prefer to try to express themselves in the target language by alternative means. They beg, steal, or borrow. Okay, ignorance is not synonymous with incompleteness, but as long as there is incompleteness or failure to attain full native speaker-like knowledge of the target language, there will be error analysis. For instance, the foreigner is less likely than some, but not all, native speakers to say, "It were him, what done it." Okay, well, measures of defiance means a learner's ignorance of target language can be expressed in terms of four categories. The first one is grammaticality, the second is acceptability, the third one is correctness, and the fourth one, strangeness and infelicity. Okay, the first one is grammaticality. What is grammaticality? First, this is synonymous with well-formedness. Second, it is the grammar, not you or I, who decides whether something said by a learner is grammatical. Third, the main problem with using grammatically as a reference point is that different grammars will register different decisions concerning borderline cases. Fourth, for Lyons, the best indicator of grammatical unacceptability is corrigibility, 1977, page 379. For instance, the milk turned rotten or a flock of elephants. They are, in Lyons' view, 1977, page 381, readily corrigible. However, the milk turned rotten. Rotten should be substituted by sour. So the milk turned sour. Or a flock of elephants should be a herd of elephants, respectively. Okay, the second one is acceptability. What is acceptability? This is not a theoretical, but practical notion, being determined by the use or usability of the form in question. In other words, when non-linguistic factors militate against the use of a form, we attribute this to an acceptability. While it is the knower or native speaker of the language who decides whether an utterance is grammatical, it is the user who decides whether it is acceptable. And then to decide on the acceptability of a piece of language, we revert not to rules, but to context, trying to contextualize the utterance in question. Can you think of a context where the following could be said? Pele, the Brazilian footballer, wore a green dress. Can you imagine it? Pele wore a green dress? Okay, yes, if he were taking part in the Rio Carnival celebrations, but the learner who said this was referring to the context where Pele was playing football, and by dress means shirt or strip. So this is an error of acceptability. Lyons, 1977, offers a discussion of the degree to which grammaticality determines acceptability. It would be reasonable to assume that the notion of grammaticality and acceptability cross-classify, giving four possible combinations. The first one, there are sentences that are grammatical and acceptable. The second one, there are sentences that are both ungrammatical and unacceptable. Indeed, they are unacceptable precisely because of their ungrammaticality, since ungrammaticality is one of several grounds for unacceptability. Error analysis is concerned principally with this category. The third one, there are sentences that are grammatical unacceptable. Borsley, 1991, page 4, gives the horse raced past the barn fell as an example of this type, arguing that despite its grammaticality, it leads the perceptual mechanism astray. Indeed, it leads the reader up the garden path, and is consequently unacceptable. The fourth, finally, there is the fourth pairing, sentences that are ungrammatical, acceptable. This type ought to be impossible if it is indeed the case that ungrammaticality is one of the grounds for unacceptability, or what Lyons called grammatical unacceptability, 1977, page 379. Okay, let's move to correctness. What is correctness? The term reserved for referring to such recourse to prescriptive normative standard is correctness. An utterance can be accepted spontaneously and used with conviction by the native speaker. It is thus acceptable. For example, the grammatical "they went with Tom and me" is edited and replaced by "with Tom and I." This is a case of acceptability being overruled by correctness. The next one is strangeness and infelicity. Okay, what is strangeness? A type of strangeness not catered for by Allerton is that resulting from switching part of speech, verbing nouns, for instance. Former United States Secretary of State Alexander Haig is parodied for his penchant for this sort of language in the following. Haig, in congressional hearings before his confirmatory, paradoxed his auditioners by abnormaling his response so that verbs were noun, nouns verbed, and adjectives adverbized. He techniques a new way to vocabulary his thought, so as to informationally uncertain anybody listening about what he had actually implicated. What Haig is doing, the concept, is to decouple the Russians from everything they are molded to. Leader, The Guardian, 3rd February 1981. The point about this example is that it would have different status and a different level of acceptability as produced by a native speaker or oral aid from its status if produced by a learner. From hate, just the same as the poet's collocations, it is strangeness, while from the learner it would be viewed as ungrammaticality. Next, infelicity. Errors at the level of pragmatics are called infelicities by Austin in his seminal work on Speech Acts, 1962. He identifies in Lecture 3 four sorts of infelicity. He calls them misfires that can vitiate the doing of the performative class of speech acts. For example, I declare you man and wife. Other dimensions, error and mistakes. We are now in a position where we can begin to construct a definition of error. Intentionality plays a decisive role in this definition. An error arises only when there was no intention to commit one. One cannot spot so-called deliberate errors because they do not exist. When any sort of deviance is intentionally incorporated into an instance of language, we do not say it's erroneous, but deviant. Examples being poetic language or an advertising jingle. Taylor also suggests that the only way we can reasonably determine whether a mistake is a slip or a genuine error is by reference to the writer's semantic and structural intentions. 1986, page 154. Notice the two sorts of intentions identified here, what he wants to say and how he expresses it. If the learner is inclined and able to correct a fault in his or her output, it is assumed that the form he or she selected was not the one intended, and we shall say that the fault is a mistake. If, on the other hand, the learner is unable or in any way disclaimed to make the correction, we assume that the form the learner used was the one intended, and that is an error. Okay, next, error, mistake, and acquisition. Learning and acquisition. What does it mean? Okay, actually, it is illuminating at least to inquire about the extent to which the error or mistake dichotomy cross-associates with expressions. 1982. Acquisitions or learning distinction. There are four possible states of knowing. See James 1994b, page 190, page 190. The first one is acquired, unlearned. If one has neither acquired nor learned a target language form that one must now process, the result will be error. The second one, acquired, unlearned. It means you have acquired the target language rules, and so you are not in a state of ignorance. You will not make errors, but you might still make mistakes if you are distracted, for example. The third, unacquired, learned. It means you will make errors, but may be able to correct or avoid this by invoking learned explicit knowledge. The fourth one, acquired, learned. It means if one has both acquired and also learned about the practical target language form that one is now called upon to produce, the outcome will probably be right, though there may be mistakes which one can correct. Okay, let's move to lapsology. What is lapsology? Do you know about that? It means the study of slips, or lapsology has been until recently wholly directed to native speaker slips and has been a research preserve of psychologists interested in how language is stored and processed in the brains of normal people and the clinical consequences when these mechanisms go wrong. McKay, 1992, identifies what he calls the three puzzles in connection with slips. First, there is the awareness puzzle, which asks how the speaker managed to make fine context-sensitive adjustments unconsciously. The second is the practice puzzle. Why is there a higher incidence of slips on the most thoroughly practiced level of language or the phonology and fewest slips on the least practiced the grammar? One would expect the opposite. The third is the detection puzzle, which asks why it is that we are most able to perceive slips on the level of the language pronunciation we are the least aware of. She made the following findings. First, the only study of foreign language slips I know is Paulet, 1997. She analyzed 2,000 spoken slips made by 45 English foreign language learners at 3 proficiency levels. First, L2 learners self-correct more of their own slips than L1 speakers do. 2. Less proficient learners produce more slips and correct fewer of these slips than more proficient learners. Third, people are selective about what they correct. Slips affecting meaning are corrected more than slips of form. Fourth, the type of speaking task, retelling a story or describing an abstract shape or describing a real-world scene, had no effect on the rate of slips and their correction. Okay, that's all about my presentation about defining error. I hope all of you are clear, understand what I have explained. Thank you for your attention. See you next meeting. Bye-bye. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.